Some debts aren't paid in money, some are paid in daughters. Tilda found that out on a Wednesday, which she always thought was the worst possible day for a life to end. Not that it ended cleanly. Nothing in her life had ever been clean. She had been running numbers for her stepfather's bar since she was 16. Not the legal numbers, the ones that went into the actual ledger, but the real ones, the ones that lived in a separate notebook she kept under her mattress, because Gareth had the organizational capacity of a drunk raccoon, and someone had to keep the whole operation from collapsing. She was 23 when she realized the operation had already collapsed. She just hadn't been told yet. The bar was called The Anchor. It sat on the corner of Delancey and Fifth in a part of the city that developers kept trying to rename and locals kept ignoring. It smelled like old beer and knew a regret, and Tilda had spent more of her life inside it than outside. She knew every creak in the floorboards, every leak behind the bar, every way the back office's single fluorescent light flickered when someone slammed the door too hard. She knew these things the way you know the inside of a box you've been living in. Not with fondness, exactly, but with the specific intimacy of someone who has never been offered anything better. Her mother had married Gareth when Tilda was 9. Her mother died when Tilda was 13. What happened after that was not remarkable in any way that made for a good story. Gareth kept the bar. He kept Tilda. He never once hit her, which he seemed to think entitled him to a kind of gratitude she could not locate in herself. He fed her. He let her sleep in the second bedroom. He made her do the books when she got old enough to understand them, and he never paid her for it. And when she brought it up once, at 18, he looked at her with genuine confusion, like the idea of paying her had genuinely never occurred to him as a possibility. She was family, he said. Family didn't charge. Family also didn't tell her about the debt. She found out about it the same way she found out about most things, through the numbers. Gareth had been cooking 2 sets of books, which she would have found impressive if one of them hadn't been designed specifically to hide things from her. The actual debt, the one owed not to a bank, not to a distributor, but to a man named Vance, was $412,000, accumulated over 6 years of bad decisions, worse luck, and the kind of borrowing that comes with interest rates that don't exist in any legal document. She confronted Gareth on a Tuesday night. He was 3 drinks in, which was his most honest setting. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He looked at the numbers she spread across the bar top, and then he looked at her, and there was something in his face that she recognized only later as relief, like he'd been waiting for someone else to find it so he wouldn't have to be the one to say it. "I've been talking to Vance," he said. "About what?" He picked up his glass. He didn't drink from it. About arrangements. She didn't understand then. She understood the next morning when 2 men in dark coats came to the Anchor before it opened, and one of them handed her a card with an address, and the other one said, very quietly, that Mr. Vance was expecting her at 10 o'clock. Gareth was not in the building. The address was in the financial district, which she found almost funny. This idea that the city's legitimate and illegitimate economies occupied the same zip code, breathed the same recycled office air. The building was glass and steel, 40 stories of it. The kind of architecture that existed specifically to make people feel small before they even got inside. She wore the only blazer she owned, which she'd bought second-hand for a job interview 3 years ago, and never worn since because she didn't get the job. She told herself the blazer was armor. She didn't quite believe it. The elevator opened onto the 38th floor and a reception area that looked like money, not the warm human kind, but the cold, deliberate kind, all pale marble and low light, and a woman behind a desk who looked at Tilda the way customs agents look at luggage they've already decided to flag. "Ms. Marsh?" the woman said. Tilda hadn't told anyone her name. "Yes, Mr. Vance will see you now." She had constructed a version of Vance in her head on the drive over, something cartoonish, probably, something she could dismiss. What she walked into was an office that looked more like a library, floor-to-ceiling shelves, actual books, a desk that cost more than her car, and a man standing at the window with his back to her, looking out at the city like he owned the view and found it disappointing. He was older than she'd expected. Not old, maybe 40, maybe a few years past it. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of stillness that didn't come from being relaxed but from having decided, long ago, that urgency was for people who hadn't thought things through. When he turned around, she saw the scar first, a pale line that ran from his jaw down toward his collar and disappeared, and then she saw his eyes, which were grey and precise, and looked at her the way she looked at ledgers, like he was already calculating. "Matilda Marsh," he said. "Tilda." She didn't know why she corrected him, force of habit. Something shifted in his expression, not much. "Sit down." She sat. He didn't. He moved to the desk and opened a folder that she recognized as the bar's financial records. Not the fake ones, the real ones, her ones, the ones she'd kept under her mattress. "You've been maintaining these," he said. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes? Since when?" 16. He looked at her for a moment over the top of the folder. "Gareth told me you were good with numbers. He didn't mention you were doing actual forensic accounting for a bar that doesn't legally exist in half its operations. Gareth doesn't know what forensic accounting is." "No," Vance said. "He doesn't." He set the folder down. "He also doesn't have $412,000. "I know. What he does have," Vance said, "is you." The room was very quiet. Outside, 38 floors down, the city kept moving, indifferent, the way cities always are when something important is being decided about someone small. Tilda looked at the folder, then at him. "That's a creative interpretation of collateral. It's the only interpretation that produces a return." He sat down then, finally, and she noticed that the chair didn't squeak. Everything in this room worked exactly as it was supposed to. "I don't want you to understand this as a transaction in which you have no agency. You can leave. The debt transfers to Gareth in full, and he will deal with the consequences of that in whatever way a man like Gareth deals with consequences. Which means badly." He said it without cruelty. Just fact. Or, "You come to work for me. 6 months. My books are a disaster. My current accountant is loyal but not particularly talented, and I have enough exposure in 3 separate jurisdictions that a single audit would be genuinely catastrophic. I need someone who can read what I have and tell me where the gaps are." She stared at him. "You want to hire me? I want to solve a problem. You're the solution that's currently available, and if I do this the 6 months, the debt is cleared." "All of it." Gareth walks away. He paused. "You also walk away, if that's what you want." She thought about the anchor. She thought about her mattress and the notebook under it, and the 16-year-old who started keeping numbers because no one else was going to, and somebody had to. She thought about Gareth's face the night before, that look of relief, and felt something harden in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. "You went through my things," she said. "I had someone go through your things. Those books are mine. They document activities that are mine," Vance said, "which makes them legally complicated." A pause. "Practically, I'd like to return them to you, once this is resolved." She sat with that for a moment. The offer was not generous. It was efficient. He wasn't pretending to rescue her. He was telling her, very plainly, that she was useful and he intended to use her, and somehow that honesty was the most disarming thing he could have said, because she'd spent her whole life being used by people who dressed it up as something else. 6 months, she said. 6 months. I have access to everything I need to do the job correctly. Yes, and I'm not, she stopped. Started again. This isn't anything other than what you said it is. He looked at her steadily. I don't operate in grey areas, Miss Marsh. Things are either what they are or they aren't. This is a professional arrangement. If at any point it becomes something else, that will be made explicit. She thought that was probably the strangest thing anyone had ever said to her, and also, somehow, the most reassuring. Okay, she said. 6 months. She started the following Monday. The office they gave her was smaller than Vance's, but larger than anything she'd ever worked in, with windows that actually opened and a desk that didn't wobble. She spent the first 3 days not doing anything except reading. There were 6 years of financial records in various states of disorder, maintained by a man named Prescott, who had the filing instincts of someone who believed chaos was a personality trait. She didn't say this to anyone. She made a list. On the fourth day, Vance's assistant, a woman named Colette, who communicated primarily in eyebrow movements, brought her coffee without being asked and said, "Prescott used to take 2 weeks just to run the quarterly reports. I'll have the first one done by Friday," Tilda said. Colette's eyebrow moved. Tilda took that as approval. She didn't see Vance much in those early weeks. He moved through the building like weather, his presence known before he arrived, the atmosphere shifting slightly in his wake. When he did appear in her doorway, it was always for a reason, never for conversation. He would ask a question, she would answer it. He would leave. He never wasted words. She found this, after a lifetime of Gareth, genuinely refreshing. The work itself was absorbing in a way she hadn't expected. It was a different scale than the Anchor's books, different by orders of magnitude, but the logic was the same. Money came in, money went out, and somewhere in the distance between those two facts, there was the truth. She found 3 separate irregularities in the first 2 weeks that Prescott hadn't caught, one of which would have triggered a reporting threshold in a federal database. She flagged them. Vance read her memo without expression and said, "Fix it." She fixed it. On the last Friday of her first month, he stopped in her doorway at 6 in the evening when the rest of the floor had emptied out and said, "You eat?" She looked up from the screen. Generally. "Come on, then." The restaurant was nothing like she'd expected. Not formal, not a performance, just a neighborhood Italian place, 3 blocks from the office where the owner knew Vance's name and brought bread without being asked. He ordered wine without looking at the list. She ordered the same thing she always ordered when she didn't know a menu, which was pasta, which was always safe. "You grew up in the city?" he asked. "Delancey and Fifth, that neighborhood's changing." "It keeps trying to," she said. "It doesn't quite manage." Something crossed his face that might have been amusement. "How long did you work the bar?" 7 years. And before that, I did homework at the bar." She tore a piece of bread. "My mother worked there too before she got sick. I think I just absorbed it. The books, I mean. Just watched until I understood. No one taught you." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "Prescott has a degree from Wharton," he said. 15 years of experience. I've had to explain the same structural problem in my offshore accounts to him 4 times. He looked at her. "You identified it in your second week without being told to look for it." She didn't know what to do with that exactly. It wasn't phrased as a compliment. It was phrased as an observation, which, from him, felt like more. "The offshore structure is a mess," she said. "No offense. Taken. Tell me why." So she told him, there over pasta and wine, what she'd found and what she thought it meant, and what she would do about it if she were the one making decisions. He listened without interrupting. He asked 3 questions, all of them precise. By the end of the meal, she had talked more than she'd talked to anyone in months, and she didn't feel depleted by it the way she usually did. She didn't have a word for it. She felt like herself, but louder. They walked back to the office building in the November dark. At the entrance he stopped, and she thought he was going to say something formal, something that established perimeters, and instead he said, "You're very good at this." She looked at him in the yellow light of the entrance. "I know." His mouth curved, just slightly. "Good night, Miss Marsh." "Tilda," she said. He paused. "Good night, Tilda." She didn't sleep well that night. She told herself it was the wine. The problem arrived in her 8th week, in the form of a man named Bellamy, who came to the office with 2 associates and a briefcase, and the specific smile of someone who has leverage and knows it. She was walking back from the copier when she saw them through the glass wall of the conference room. Vance, still, at the head of the table, and Bellamy across from him, still smiling that smile. She asked Colette about it afterward. Colette's eyebrow communicated several things at once. "Bellamy is from the Trent organization," she said, which Tilda understood to mean a rival, and specifically an ambitious one. "He's been trying to acquire 3 of our holding companies for 8 months. Acquire meaning purchase or acquire meaning take. With Bellamy, Colette said, the distinction is usually theoretical. That evening Vance came to her office, which he hadn't done since the first week. He stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking, which was unusual for him, and she set down what she was doing and waited. "Bellamy made an offer," he said. "For the logistics holdings. Is the offer legitimate? The price is legitimate. The intent is not. The logistics holdings are how we move 60% of what we move. He knows that. He's not buying a business. He's buying a choke point." He came in then and sat, not at her desk, but in the chair across from it, the one that clients used when she had clients, which she didn't. I turned it down. "Okay, he'll come back with something else." He looked at the papers on her desk. "He'll come back with something I can't turn down as cleanly." She thought about that. What would make it clean? Restructuring the holdings so they don't look like what they are. Paper distance between the logistics function and the registered entities. He paused. "It's the kind of thing Prescott would take 6 months to do badly." She pulled a notepad toward her. "How long do I have?" He looked at her. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Okay. She clicked her pen. "Start talking." She worked 16-hour days for 3 weeks. She also started to understand, during those 3 weeks, something she'd been half-knowing and fully avoiding, that the reason she was working 16-hour days was not exclusively about the restructuring, that some portion of it was about the way he sat across from her in the evening, after everyone else had gone home, and went through her drafts with the same focused attention he gave everything, and how sometimes in the course of going through them he would say, very quietly, "Here," and point to something she'd missed, and the closeness required to do that, the proximity, had begun to register in her body in a way she did not think was professional. She was aware this was a problem. She was not sure what to do about it. On the last day of the 3rd week, she finished the restructuring at 11:30 at night, sat back in her chair, and said, "To nobody, done." Vance appeared in the doorway at 11:31, which meant he'd been in his office, which meant he'd stayed, which meant she didn't finish that thought. "Done," he said. "Done." She turned the screen toward him. "Bellamy can make any offer he wants. There's nothing to buy." He came around the desk and read through it. She watched him read. She watched the way his eyes moved across the screen, the way his hand came up to rest on the edge of the desk near her, not touching anything, just near. She was tired enough that her defenses were low and honest. "Tilda," he said. "Yes?" He didn't look up from the screen. "You've been avoiding something." She was quiet. "So have I," he said. He straightened then and looked at her, and for once he didn't look like a man who had decided things in advance. He looked like someone standing at the edge of a ledger that didn't balance, trying to decide if that was a problem or just a new kind of truth. "I don't think you should be my accountant anymore." Her stomach dropped. "I think," he continued, "that the 6 months ends in 2 weeks, and when it does, the professional arrangement ends with it. And then I'd like to—" He stopped. Started again, which she'd never seen him do. "I'd like to take you to dinner, not for work." She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the city hummed in the dark, indifferent and enormous and full of people who didn't know anything about this room, this desk, this particular recalculation happening in her chest. "You're very precise about things," she said. "I try to be. And when you say the professional arrangement ends, I mean you're free." He said it simply. "The debt is cleared. Has been for 3 weeks. I didn't think it was appropriate to mention while we were still in the middle of work." A pause. "Gareth is alive and financially stable, if you were wondering. I had someone set him up with a restructured repayment situation that doesn't involve you." She hadn't known that. She felt something move through her, not the relief she would have expected, but something more complicated. Gratitude laced with anger at herself for not asking sooner, at him for not telling her, at Gareth for making this the shape her life had taken. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes." He didn't offer more than that, just held it, the admission, without flinching. She looked at her hands, at the notepad full of her own writing, at the 3 weeks of 16-hour days that were not, she now understood, entirely about the work. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks, and then dinner, if you want." She looked at him, really looked, the way she rarely let herself. The scar along his jaw, the careful grey eyes, the man who had spoken to her like numbers and turned out to be something stranger and more human than that. "I want," she said. He nodded once. Then he picked up her jacket from the back of her chair and held it out to her, and she stood, and she put it on, and he said, "Go home, sleep. The restructuring will still exist in the morning." "I know," she said. "I built it." That small curve of his mouth again. "Good night, Tilda. Good night, Vance." She was halfway to the elevator when she stopped, turned around. He was still standing in the doorway of her office, and he was watching her go, and he didn't look away when she caught him doing it. "What's your first name?" she said. A pause. Like the question surprised him, like not many people asked. "Dorian," he said. She turned it over in her head, filed it somewhere new. "Good night, Dorian." She got into the elevator. The doors closed. She leaned back against the wall and looked at the ceiling and thought about how strange it was that the worst morning of her life, the morning two men in dark coats came to the anchor before it opened, had led here, that the debt Gareth owed had been settled not in suffering but in discovery, in 16-hour nights, in a man who talked to her like she was worth being precise with, that what she'd lost, the bar, the notebook, the mattress, the small compressed shape of a life that had never really fit her, she didn't want back, that what was ahead was not what anyone would have drawn up, not clean, not safe, not simple in any way she knew how to name. But she was not a girl who needed things to be simple. She was a girl who needed them to be true. And for the first time in a long time, something was. The 2 weeks passed the way good things pass, faster than they should. She finished out her contract, handed Prescott a 40-page transition document that he looked at with the expression of a man who has been given a gift in a language he doesn't speak. And on her last official day, she cleared her desk and took only the notepad, which she figured she'd earned. Dorian was waiting at the elevator, not with flowers, not with a speech. Just there, jacket on, hands in his pockets, watching the doors open like he'd been standing there for exactly as long as he needed to, and not a second more. "Dinner," he said. "Dinner," she agreed. They walked out of the building together into the December evening, and the city was cold and bright and entirely indifferent to the two of them. The way cities always are, the way she'd always found vaguely comforting, that the city didn't care, that it made no claims, that it just went on. She'd spent her whole life inside that indifference. She knew how to move through it. She just hadn't expected company. He held the door of the restaurant. Not the Italian place this time, somewhere new, somewhere that would become theirs. And she stepped inside, and the warmth hit her like something she hadn't known she was waiting for. She was not the girl from Delancey and Fifth anymore. She was not Gareth's books or her mother's ghost or a debt that someone else had run up. She was Tilda Marsh, who had walked into a glass tower in a second-hand blazer and refused to be reduced to a line item, who had found in the cold arithmetic of a dangerous man's finances something that felt improbably like a door. She went through it.